Hey there, it's Jonathan here with another video, and if this is the first of my videos that you're watching, welcome to the channel. My name is Jonathan. I live in Japan. I'm an English teacher here through the JET program on my third year, and usually I make videos about life in Japan, teaching English, the JET program itself, things like that. But today I'm going to be taking a little bit different of a focus, and instead of teaching English to other people, I'm going to talk about learning Japanese. So my first trip to Japan, actually my first two trips to Japan, were in 2016 during a quarter life crisis that I was having. And on my first trip to Japan, I could say konnichiwa and arigato, which is like that's like stuff that you learn from like pop songs. So my second time around coming, I wanted to have a little bit more of a grasp, so I started studying Japanese. And so what this video today is going to be about is the things that I've used from that, I guess it was about 4 years ago now, from that moment 4 years ago up until today. What I've used and why I've used those things and why I have learned the way I've learned. So as you can see from the title, this is a diligent, lazy person's guide to learning Japanese, because I am a diligent person. When I set goals, I like to set measurable goals and I like to stick to them. But on the other hand, I'm a lazy person, and if something isn't fun, convenient to use, and doesn't fit into my schedule neatly whenever I want, I'm probably not gonna stick with it. I just won't. My brain doesn't care enough about it if it isn't those three things. And so that's really shaped my experience, and I feel like I'm not the only person out there who thinks this way and who learns this way. So if this speaks to you, keep watching with me. But to dive in a little bit more into my own history about learning Japanese, so I did those two trips in 2016, and then in 2018 I moved to Japan. So by that point, I had learned hiragana and katakana, so I learned those for the second trip around, and my grammar was pretty beginner level when I came back in 2018. So I could say, like, I don't have a pen. Kore wa pen desu. That was pretty much the extent of my Japanese that I was comfortable using. But like I said, I live in rural, small town Japan, so I was plunked somewhere where it was like kind of do or die. I needed to learn Japanese. One of my schools when I first got here was an elementary school, so none of my coworkers really spoke English. My supervisors didn't speak English. They still don't really speak English, so in those early days, there was a lot of like talking into Google Translate and like showing phones to each other. And I did not want to live like that because that was exhausting. So I decided that I needed to study and I really needed to get better at Japanese. So currently, I am somewhere around the N3 level, if you're familiar with the JLPT exam. If you're not familiar with the JLPT, Japanese Language Proficiency Test, if you're not familiar with that, N3 basically means that I can handle most everyday conversations, and I can write about most everyday topics. My kanji writing is terrible, but I can at least recognize kanji if I'm typing on a keyboard. I will say that, at least in conversation, it really helps if the person that I'm speaking to is speaking at kind of a generous speed, like a sympathetic listener. So for what I mean by that is kind of like how I'm talking in this video right now. I'm reducing my speed a little bit from how I would speak as a native speaker to a native speaker. Because if I was talking at that speed, I'd probably be talking a little bit faster like this, and I really want to make sure that I'm understood, so I slow my speed down a little bit. And I work best when my Japanese language partner of that interaction is also doing a similar kind of thing. Like I said, I'm diligent, but I'm lazy, so I like to set schedules, I like to set goals for myself, I like routines, and so that's reflected in the resources that I've used and stuck with. But if it's not fun, I drop it. So I have tried out a lot of different resources over the years, and not all of them have stuck. But I'm glad I've tried them all out because I've learned what's worked and what hasn't worked for me. If you have heard much about learning styles, you might know that there's the theory out there that people are either visual or auditory or kinesthetic learners. And I'm kind of here to rain on that parade a little bit, because all the research has shown that it's basically a pseudoscience, and people learn best when they learn from all different kinds of ways. So even though you can have stated preferences, you can absolutely have a preference on how you learn, but research shows that your brain doesn't really care. You might find certain things more interesting than others, but your brain learns best when it has different ways of acquiring information. So that's kind of also informed and molded my own Japanese learning. It also maps out really well onto the 4 areas of language learning, because if you only have auditory, so the 4 areas of language learning are, what are they? They're reading, writing, speaking, listening. So if you only have auditory information, you're not really going to get reading and writing accomplished. And if you only have visual information, you're not really going to get speaking and listening done. You need all those different ways to learn a language. And that's what I have to say about that. So fight me in the comments if you want to. Next, let's get into the good stuff, shall we? So the resources. These are the things that I've used over the years, and I've ranked them roughly in order from most useful to least useful. And rather than giving them like an out of 10 rating system, I'm doing the Japanese classroom method, which is the Hanamaru to Batsu, because they're just more fun. So in the first section are the Hanamaru items. So these are things that I think are amazing, excellent. Everyone should at least try them. So first up, we have Japanese language camps or in-person classes. And this is the first thing I'm going to mention, because nothing substitutes having a teacher teach you Japanese, or teach you a language. I've only had a couple in-person class settings. I've only done a couple weeks, so I really do envy the other Jets who have come to Japan with like a Japanese minor or a Japanese major, because they've had so much more chances to speak with a teacher who can really explain nuance and explain context. Because I find that when I do a lot of self-study because I'm diligent. And I find that when I learn grammar points or I learn vocab, I don't necessarily understand the context they're in. And so it's useful to have someone tell you, like, so for example, something I learned a few weeks ago was this verb form of to want, that is a little bit less common. It's like the tageru form. And the tagaru form, and I was like, so I kind of made some, like, I kind of jotted down some like example sentences that I thought were appropriate, and I showed them to someone who is kind of like, we're like language exchange teachers for each other, and he explained to me, like, actually you wouldn't use that for first person. You wouldn't use that about yourself. You use that at like third person. And actually you wouldn't really use it in a positive context. It's kind of a negative, like you're taking a jab at the person. And that's something that I would never have learned if I hadn't spoken to a teacher about it. Even if I had spoken to a native speaker, they might not necessarily have corrected me on it, because the nuance is not offensively large. And so that actually gets to my next resource, which is native speakers. So, native speakers are both a study resource and also the reward, I guess, for studying. Like, I get to speak to my coworkers, I get to talk to my neighbors. So it kind of muddies the line between resource and reward. But really, when you speak with a native speaker, that's how you practice. It's really how you practice and how you get comfortable speaking and listening and having flow to your conversation. There's nothing more frustrating for me with my students when I ask them a question, and it's a fairly simple question, but they start the sentence and then they stop and they think for like 30 seconds, and it's like, okay, we're not having a conversation anymore. You're just trying to remember this grammar point, and it's like, come on, like, keep the flow going. So that's why native speakers, they aren't necessarily going to correct you all the time, because if you're having a conversation with a friend, they're not going to nitpick your grammar. Even if you ask someone like, oh, like, please correct all my mistakes. Think about when you're speaking to a non-native English speaker. Are you going to correct every single mistake they make? Probably not, because that breaks the flow of the conversation, and it's a little rude, or it's a little weird, or at least annoying. So that's why I think that a teacher is still the number one way to go versus just having conversation partners. But speaking of conversation partners, so along with native speakers, reading native material is another kind of mix between a reward and a resource, a study resource. So I do a fair amount of reading now. I work at a junior high school, and in their library, I just learned like a few months ago that I'm allowed to check out books. So I've started checking out books, and it's been a lot of fun because I get to get recommendations from my students on what manga they're reading, and so I just stick to like manga, short stories, like really basic level stuff. But I try like. I've tried reading picture books, but like I can't get through a picture book because it's just not interesting. I don't know if anyone's watched an episode of Arthur, if anyone remembers this episode of Arthur from way back when Arthur tries to get Buster to read a book, and he keeps getting him easier and easier books, but he can't finish them. And finally, Buster finds this book on his own that interests him, and he reads the whole thing. And that, I am Buster. Like, it needs to be interesting. So most manga, especially like the shonen manga, I just can't get into it. Like Conan is super popular, but I can't get into it. I need to be interested in it. So something that I've done is I found a couple novels that I read when I was younger, like English novels that are translated into Japanese, and I've been reading a couple of those because I already know the story, I'm already interested, and I get to like fill in the holes. So I read native material in a way that works for me and I find exciting. Next, for the consumable resource, we have WaniKani. I cannot say enough good things about WaniKani. It is the reason that I can read, and by extension, the reason that I can speak today, because it's just... so WaniKani is a spaced repetition system, SRS system, and it's basically just flashcards. But it's taught me kanji, and it teaches you kanji as well as vocabulary. And it's a game. There's like levels, so you can level up. And Tofugu, the parent company, they also made a hiragana and katakana guide, and those are the two guides that actually started me off at the very beginning. So I've been a Tofugu fan since day one, literally day one of my Japanese learning adventure. So it's well designed, it's well made, it's expensive. They have sales every year around Christmas. It's expensive, but it's been worth every dollar that I've invested. And it's a game. Like you can learn at your own pace, so up to a certain speed. You can learn at your own pace. So I've really like, I can't thank it enough. But what I think WaniKani really has in terms of an edge over other competition is because there's other SRS systems out there, but what WaniKani has is an excellent support community. So there's forums. I'm on the forums. If you look for Jonathan, you can find me all over the place. But it's got a huge community of learners, and it's a really supportive place. Like it's one of the healthiest online forum environments that I've ever been a part of. So that says something. I ask a lot of questions there. I see a lot of really great questions that I didn't even think of, and I get really great perspective. So I just like, I have a WaniKani sticker on the back of my laptop because they had a coloring contest and I participated in it and I got a sticker. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. So yeah, check it out. I'm happy to make a whole other video on WaniKani if you're interested. But moving on, the other big resource that I use constantly online is Jisho, jisho.org. So it's just an online dictionary, and it's all user generated. So you have to be a little mindful of it, and you have to think a little bit critically sometimes, because it is all user generated. There isn't necessarily like a publisher, like a Japanese publisher who's overseeing it. But I would say generally it's pretty reliable and it has pretty good content. What I really like it for is you can enter English text, Japanese text like in hiragana or katakana or kanji, or even in romaji, and it will give you results. So the only reason I didn't rank it any higher is because it is just a dictionary. So like it doesn't teach you Japanese. It's just a dictionary, but it's the best dictionary that I have experienced. Okay, so next, let's move on to the Nijumaru category. So these are the resources that I think are great, but I'm not maybe over the moon about. So first off, we have textbooks. So I love textbooks. I'm a self-studier. I'm not necessarily the greatest at sticking through them from beginning to end, but for the beginner part of my journey, I was a Genki boy. There's a lot of textbooks out there for the beginner learners. I think Japanese for Busy People is pretty popular. I think a lot of people online use Tai Kim's Grammar Guide or Nihongo no Mori, but I use Genki. I heard good things about it. I really enjoyed it. It's got, I don't know, it's got cute little characters. It's got pretty good vocab sections, and it does a pretty good job explaining the grammar. But yeah, I made it through. So this is the second volume. The first volume, I made it through that before I even came back in 2018. The second volume, I got through half of it, and then I kind of moved on to some other resources, and then I came back, but I had to know what happened to Mary and Takeshi in the end, so spoiler alert. So I came back and I just finished reading all the passages and like going over some of the activities. For the intermediate textbooks, I've been using Tobira, which I'm about a third of the way through this textbook, but I'm learning more of the grammar outside of textbooks because I'm kind of getting a little tired of textbooks, and if I'm not interested, then I stop using it. But it did manage to hold my interest, at least because it has pretty comprehensive example sentences on how to use stuff. My biggest problem with this textbook is a lot of it's based around Japanese culture, and I feel like by the point in your Japanese learning journey that you're using this textbook, you don't need, like, you know about Japanese culture. Like I know what sushi is. I know what taiyaki is. Like, you know, it's like I don't need it's not interesting anymore. So I kind of have fallen a bit off the wayside by that, but maybe I'll go back and finish it when I'm reviewing for like a JLPT exam in the future. Next up is, so online is Anki. So Anki is like the free, no budget cousin of WaniKani. And I know a lot of people who swear by Anki, and the reason that I rate it so highly, even though I haven't used it much, is because if I didn't use WaniKani so much, I think Anki would be where I would be going to as my go-to. I have used it to review for a couple of the JLPT tests, so I do enjoy it. But basically, you have to build your own flashcard deck with Anki. It doesn't put it together neatly for you like WaniKani does. It doesn't have the fun forums like WaniKani does. But it's a pretty useful tool. You just need to put in a bit more time and effort, so it's not great for lazy people. But because you have to do all like the heavy lifting yourself, it's free. So if budget's a big concern for you, I'd say go for Anki. But lazy. I like my WaniKani. So next is the Maru category. So these are the resources that are good. I'm glad I have them. And if you're thinking of using them, check them out. But maybe you don't need them in your life. So first off is I have the Dictionary of Basic and Intermediate Japanese Grammar. So these have been almost a little bit overshadowed by Jisho at this point now. But what these have a leg up on over Jisho is that they're about grammar, so they're grammar focused. So whereas Jisho is more vocab and it does explain some grammar a little bit, these are all about grammar. What I don't love about them is in the basic dictionary, there's a ton of romaji. It's all romaji everywhere. Let's see if you can see that. It's all romaji, and the intermediate level one, it gets rid of the romaji, but there is still furigana, which, like, if you can see that, the furigana is like the little like hint kana, so you can read kanji, which I get it, and so I don't hate that too much for this. But in both of the dictionaries, they arrange their grammar points in English alphabetical order, which I just think is bizarre. Like, they go from A to Z, which is just, why? I don't understand this, because especially, even even at the basic level, you understand the a, I, U, E, O, the Goju, Onjun, the Japanese alphabetical order. So it really bugs me. It really bugs me because it really doesn't feel intuitive to have to look for grammar points based on their English letter equivalent. But if you can get past all that, they are good because they do have a good job. They do a good job of like example sentences with translations. They give you notes on like usage, and they give you notes on construction, like how to actually use it grammatically correctly in a sentence. So it does a lot of things right. But I find that Googling can do a lot of what these can do. So they're expensive, and that's the other reason why I'm like, you don't necessarily need them in your life, because they're expensive. Like this one is 3,700 yen. And this one's a little bit cheaper. I think this one's about, it's 2,800 yen. But, you know, 6,000 yen versus free. Next are a couple kind of more niche-ish resources. So I sometimes use the Netflix language learning app. So what you can do is you can install it for free, and it ties right nicely into your Netflix viewing experience. It just opens a little like side window, but basically you can add in subtitles. Like I think they're automatically generated subtitles. And it lets you look up definitions, translations, things like that. So it's not going to teach you Japanese, it's not going to teach you stuff, but it's good for at least reviewing, or at least it's good for if there's one word in a sentence that I really don't know and I'm hearing it a lot, for example, then I can at least pause and look it up. But like with having a conversation with a Japanese native speaker, when you break up the flow of the conversation too much, when you break up the flow of the show too much, it loses its interest. So I don't want to watch the anime anymore, because then it feels like studying rather than just enjoying anime. So I'm a little cautious when I use that. But when I don't use it and I do watch anime in Japanese, then I just accept that there's going to be a lot of stuff that I'm going to miss. That's kind of the flip side. So I use it when I'm motivated. In that same kind of vein, I play a lot of Japanese video games. So I have a Wii, boop, boop, boop. I have a Switch as well, but I play English games on that one. And I have a DS, so I have some Japanese games for that as well. And I really enjoy playing video games. So it's interesting, it's fun, it's exciting, it's something I can do for a long time. But like with Netflix, if I spend too much time looking up words, then I kind of lose interest in the game, and then I don't study anything. Versus if I don't study actively, then I just enjoy the game and I know I'll miss a lot of stuff, but whatever. So like right now I'm going through Pokemon Moon, and it uses a lot of casual stuff that I'm not familiar with, because it's very like casual spoken Japanese. So it's a lot of stuff that I'm not familiar with, but in context I can kind of figure out like, okay, this is what they're talking about. But when there's words that I come across repeatedly, or a grammar point that I come across repeatedly, that's when I'll go and actually look it up. And I use those obviously in conjunction with either one of these bad boys, or Jisho, or WaniKani has a pretty good search function too. So these resources, you don't use them in isolation. They're all best when they work together. However, my one resource that I put in the little like sankaku category is Satori Reader, because I think it tries to do too much on its own. So Satori Reader, if you're not familiar, it's basically an online graded reader website. I've only used the free version. There is a paid version which has more content. It hasn't appealed to me enough because the stories aren't interesting enough for me. I can't get interested in them. So I think what it tries to do too much of is it has the stories. It has audio for the stories. It has a dictionary but it has like translations, and it has example sentences for the words that it uses, and it's meant to be kind of like an all-in-one package, but it just feels a little clunky, and it like if you're reading at a level even slightly above what you're used to, like I said, I'm a diligent person. I'm the kind of person who I like to click through everything and I like to research everything. So like one short story can produce so much content that I don't know exactly, and I kind of get bogged down clicking on links and reading through things, and I stop paying attention to the actual story at hand, so it loses interest for me. But versus video games and books, I enjoy those things, versus reading a graded reader isn't inherently interesting to me, so I'm not gonna stick with it. So that's why I don't really use Satori Reader. But I know for some people that's their thing, so great, go ahead, but I don't really recommend it. Last and certainly least is the Batsu category. This is only for jets, so if you're not a jet, don't worry about this, you'll never have to encounter this resource. But for jets, if you've ever seen the emails from Claire about the Council for Local Authorities for International Relations, if you've ever seen the ads for the Japanese online learning class, just don't. I've done the intermediate course, I started the advanced course, and I stopped because I can't handle them. The intermediate course has this old man who has these color-coded flashcards, but he never explained what the color-coded flashcards mean. So he's pointing in all these sentences or all these colors, but I don't know what the colors mean. So I don't understand what he's talking about. And in the advanced course, they have all these dialogue videos, but the dialogues are cheesy and they're not natural. And for an advanced level course, you'd hope that they could speak a bit more naturally because you're at that level. So it's just it felt like I was watching a drama almost, and that's so that is the one resource that I've experienced that I actively would say just skip it, you're better off without it. Yeah, that's all I have to say about that. So that's all. Thank you for sticking with this video. If you liked it, give it a like, give it a thumbs up, give it a little comment. Actually, I am interested to hear, because if you've watched this whole video, I'm assuming you've done some Japanese study of your own, so I'm interested in hearing what resources you've used. I'm especially interested in hearing what resources you're using if you're at the intermediate or advanced levels, because then I might have something new that I can discover. Or if there's anything that I've reviewed that you disagree with on how I ranked it, then feel free to let me know about that as well. Come fight me in the comment section, y'all. But other than that, I guess that's all I have for today. So if you haven't already and you're interested in following me more, give me a little click on the subscribe button, give me a little click on the bell. I'd love to have you on for my journey in Japan, with my Japanese learning and whatever else I may do. I'm also on Instagram, so you can follow me at JonaPanstagram. And on Instagram is where I post more of my day-to-day adventures, things like that, just my what my life is generally like. Versus here is a bit more focused videos. So if you want to see what I'm doing, Instagram is the place to go. And that's all I have for today. So peace, love, happiness, wish you all the best, and catch you next time.